This is Shay M. Lawson, Esquire, and you are listening to A Minute of Your Time, a podcast helping entrepreneurs legally protect their passion and profits. Today, I have a bonus episode for you. If you have not listened to episode 9, where I had on as a guest with me, Delania Barbee, Esquire, and we talked about protecting your business for the unthinkable. And there are just some gems in there. We are out here as entrepreneurs pouring our time, our heart, our effort into building a business, but we're not really laying the foundation for if the unthinkable happens. Where will everything you've worked for go? You don't want to leave that just hanging in the balance. And there's so much more to planning for the future than a will. And Attorney Barbee just broke it all down for us. She talked to us about powers of attorney and trusts and wills and just the basic bare bones things in everyday terms to help us really get our wheels going on how to protect the legacy of our business. So if you did not listen to episode 9, please go on over to shayandlawson.com, click the podcast. We're also on Spotify. You want to hear this episode. And so today's bonus is really a lot of the meat and potatoes that I didn't have room to include in episode 9, where she really does a deep dive into what is the difference between having a will and a trust? And there are multiple different kinds of powers of attorney that as an attorney, I didn't even know that there were different specific kinds of power of attorney that you could actually delineate. And she really breaks that down. She's provided an amazing downloadable that we have in the show notes for you. And so in today's bonus episode, we are going to just go back and deep dive into those topics of getting a will versus getting a trust versus the different kinds of powers of attorney. So I definitely suggest you listen to episode number 9 first to get some context and then dive into this bonus. There's such good content here. I just want to thank Delania again for coming onto the show and sharing this. Of course, we have to give our legal disclaimer that this is not individualized legal advice. The things that you hear on this podcast and any other episode do not create an attorney-client relationship between you or any of my guests. This is just to get your wheels going, information only, and does not replace you getting a consultation or just individualized legal advice to fit your specific needs. So go ahead, listen in, and I'll come back in at the end. So the first question I want to ask is, I think sometimes it's hard to think about things that you cannot physically touch with your hands as assets, right? And so as an artist or a producer or a songwriter, can I put like my unpublished songs, or if I'm a producer, like my beats, like literally, let's just say I have a whole hard drive. Can I put that in my will? And I guess kind of what else should creatives be thinking about as an asset? Like what is considered an asset for a will, specifically as it relates to creatives?
So I guess with that question, I'll take a step back and explain what a will is and what it isn't.
Okay.
So a will is a document that is put into place as part of your estate plan. It's not your entire estate plan if you're doing a full estate plan, but it's part of your estate plan that really talks about what is going to happen and how your assets are going to be distributed in the event of your death. And it also appoints someone to do that so that that's done in advance of you passing, so that individuals don't have to go to court and try to get appointed. So with your will, you can leave instructions. And the will is one type of tool. There's also a tool that I need to mention before I answer your question, which is a trust. A trust is distinct from a will in that a trust, your assets can get named in the trust during your lifetime. So with your trust, you're actually, whatever your assets are, you're titling them or putting them in the name of the trust. So you're personally not, I will try to explain this as simple as possible, but you're personally not owning your assets. And it seems weird, but your trust, if you are creating a revocable living trust, which is one of the most common types of trust, you have full control over that. If you're drafting that in that way. So you'll have full control over the assets. It's just not in your name. Now, the reason why some people will go towards a trust as opposed to a will is because if you were unable to handle those assets, the successor trustee who you name, because you'd be your initial trustee, of course, managing the assets, your successor would take over and be able to manage those assets in your incapacity or when you pass away. So that's, just put that to the side. That's what the trust is. And the will is your assets are not named in your will, and your will takes effect at the time of your passing, not if you're incapacitated. Oftentimes, as a caveat, people will have a will and a trust at the same time just because mistakes happen and you don't always name everything in your trust, so you still want the will as your backup.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the two larger documents. You'll also have a power of attorney for healthcare and finances that go into play. So I say all of that to say, when we take a step back and think about assets that you have, like a laptop, for example, with all of your information on it, for example, your beats, like you're saying. So if you have beats, you can say in your will, if you only have a will, you can say that whoever the personal representative is going to do certain things with your beats, and it's going to go to whoever is your beneficiary. Your beneficiary is the person who gets the benefit of that. With your trust, if you have a trust, you could actually allow the trust to be the owner of those things, and the trust will then manage that asset when you're no longer here, or if you're incapacitated and can't make your own decisions. The trust would be able to manage those assets. You know, if there's any type of financial resources that come from the use of those beats in the future, the financial benefit would go into the trust for the benefits of whoever you have as your beneficiaries.
Okay,
I
so
hope that
wait, I wanna stop you there for two things. What is considered incapacitated? Like, what does that mean that am does that automatically mean that, oh, I'm on life support somewhere? Or what are some other situations where somebody could be considered incapacitated and their trust would be managing their assets?
So as I mentioned, it's generally thought about as you can't make your own decisions. So it doesn't have to be that you're in a coma. It could also be some type of mental disability where it's so severe that you're unable to, you don't have full capacity at that point. And the way that it's determined is typically by a doctor. But the thing about your trust is your trust could actually define what incapacity means for you.
Mm-hmm.
So some people will say that two doctors have to determine that I'm incapacitated. Some people will say, as long as my a physician says that I'm incapacitated, we go with that. So it's not a black and white
Yeah,
definition.
I
But
think that's my thing, because I'm thinking about Britney Spears, and like how I know that she's had a conservator over her stuff for quite a while. And I know that there are just a lot of creatives and celebrities that struggle with substance abuse or incarceration. And so I'm just wondering, if you go to rehab or you go to jail, or let's just say you are like undergoing like chemotherapy or radiation or something like that, and just not able to handle your everyday business, are those things that could be defined in the trust as incapacity?
oh, those are very good questions. Thank you for asking those. So if someone's in jail, they're not incapacitated so long as, they're fully here. They're not experiencing some type of physical symptom like being in a coma or, type of severe mental disability. If they're still fine, but they just happen to be incarcerated, a couple of things that they could have in place, or part of the estate plan that they want to put in place, are their financial power of attorney. So a durable financial power of attorney allows for someone to make financial decisions on your behalf. Now, the reason why you want this, even if you don't have a trust, is, again, to my earlier point, sometimes people just fail to put everything in the trust, so it's a good backup if there's something that you didn't put in the trust, but you need someone to manage. But second, you can create your durable financial power of attorney so that it's already in effect. You don't have to wait until incapacity for it to be in effect. So if someone's, for example, incarcerated and they just can't handle it, their own affairs, they could give someone the right to handle their financial affairs. And that right could be as broad or as limited as they want to. So it could be that they just handle their assets regarding their music involvement in music and things that relate to that. It could be that they handle everything. It could be managing their real estate. So they have the ability to define what that power of attorney looks like for the person that they appoint to be their agent. The second thing that you mentioned is, someone is having some type of medical issue. Well, I always advise that a healthcare power of attorney be put into place as well, because a healthcare power of attorney allows you to appoint someone to make medical decisions on your behalf. Now, that does come into place in terms of incapacity. So when something happens, you can't make your own decisions, that person would be able to step up. But that prevents a lot of people from going to court and arguing over this, which for people in the public eye can be difficult. So we're talking about assets and things like that, but with celebrities, you also have your publicity and you have your reputation and your brand. So when there's a lot going on that's messy, it can harm their brand as well, even though it may not have anything to do with them directly, but family members going to court and arguing. So having these documents, like even a healthcare power of attorney, that makes it simple. So people are not going to court and arguing over who can make your medical decisions, or for financial reasons, who can make your financial decisions. It's a more seamless process because you already have designated those things.
Already done all this.
Yeah. So it's also important to think about this as a brand management strategy, not only as an asset management strategy.
Whoa. Okay, so now I want to clarify, because we've talked about two different powers of attorney. You've talked about a financial power of attorney. You've talked about a healthcare power of attorney. I know in a lot of my management contracts, like agent contracts, they all have a power of attorney clause in there where it says you are granting me power of attorney to, sign on your behalf in your absence, blah, 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 blah. Like, how many different kinds of power of attorney are there? Is there a type of power of attorney where it's like, let's just say that I want to make my husband or my wife or whoever the overarching, is there just like one giant power of attorney where it's like, hey, this person is my financial, healthcare, everything power of attorney?
Sure. You could do an overarching power of attorney where it talks about, like, for example, the one that you mentioned, your spouse, you want them to do everything regarding finances, and you also want them to do your healthcare. That's completely fine. That could be drafted, but a lot of people will want different people for healthcare and finances, because the person that they feel is best to manage their healthcare may not be the same person they think can handle their money. But to another point, let's say someone is in real estate, does a lot of real estate transactions.
Yeah.
Even if they have their spouse or mother, whoever, generally as their power of attorney, they may have someone else that they are appointing to help them manage their real estate. So someone who shows up at the closings and signs on their behalf, to your point of, having documents that have maybe a simple power of attorney for a particular purpose. So there are many different types of power of attorneys that can be put into place, but at the simplest level, we would think about the financial and the healthcare.
Okay, awesome. So I want to just round out, because I know that this is a lot for me as a lawyer that's just not familiar with this. We talked about this before on the phone, where I tell people like, hey, stay in your lane. I want people to specialize in what they specialize in. And I know that this is all a lot for me to take in. It's like you learn these things in law school, but not at the depth in which you know them. So I want to make sure that I'm hearing you correctly so that my listeners are understanding correctly. So number one, a will is not an entire estate plan, that there are multiple pieces of the pie that would create an estate plan, and a will is just one of them. And so another portion of that estate plan can be a trust, which would dictate how your assets are managed in the event you are incapacitated, where a will only covers what happens when you actually pass away. Is that correct so far?
Yes, the trust would capture for those items that are named in the trust, incapacity and when you pass.
Okay, and so then as it relates to assets, because that's how we began the conversation of what can I put in here, you can literally list anything as an asset to either be placed into a trust or to be placed into the will that you want, that you care about having passed on to somebody else, in the event something should happen to you. And you have created for our listeners a checklist, an estate planning checklist. So you guys, you're listening in. Just like I said, this is a lot. Um, Delana has made literally a checklist that defines each and every one of these words. She goes over all of the key items. So make sure that you go over. There will be a link in the show notes that will take you over to this checklist. And you want to make sure, just like she said, this is not just estate planning. This is brand planning for you, especially if you are in the public eye, you have a public brand. You want to make sure that these things are secured.
So that is it. That wraps up the bonus episode with attorney Delania Barbee. We want to thank her again so much for coming on, so much for sharing those gems. I think the thing that stood out the most for me was her saying that your estate plan is not just for your estate, but it can also be a brand management plan in the event something happens to you and you know that you already have the right people in place to manage your business affairs, your life affairs, should something happen to you. And that might not always be the same person. Someone who is a business colleague who knows your business in and out might be the best person to be a power of attorney to handle your business affairs. But that's not the person you might trust with your health decisions or your financial decisions. So again, I can't reiterate enough that you want to take the time to set up an appointment, to talk to a professional who does this, to talk to an attorney who will take the time to listen to your individual needs and help you come up with the best estate planning strategy for yourself and your business. If the coronavirus has taught us anything, is that the unexpected is literally the unexpected, and the best we can do is plan for it. And now is a really great opportunity to sit back and think about the things that are important to you and how you want to protect the legacy that you are creating. So thank you so much for listening. There are show notes over at shaymlawson.com. Again, that attorney Barbee has given us, where she clearly explains each of these different topics. She gives a clear checklist of all the things that maybe you can talk about when you set up your appointment with an attorney. If you haven't listened to episode 9, go back, because we talk about how much to budget for an attorney, the types of questions to ask when you are making sure you have the right estate attorney to help you with your plans. And again, that's over at shaymlawson.com. Click on the podcast. The show notes are right there. Make sure you're subscribed and share with a friend. Until next time, this has been A Minute of Your Time.